Welcome to Saturday Sampler number 9. I'm sorry that you can't be here yet in the store. We're getting very close, but even for Saturday Sampler, it's going to be a bit difficult because we do have to work with a reduced capacity in the store. Anyway, that won't be for a couple of weeks, but I know you want to get started on your month 9 block, so I wanted to get this out to you. Now, the way we hope this is going to work out today is that you can either watch the whole video from start to finish, or you'll be able to stop it and do the next part of your block. I sort of like that idea because then I feel like you're really sewing along with me. We don't usually get to do that in Saturday Sampler, but maybe this will work. So I'm going to start with some cutting, and I'm going to move over to the display table here. As usual, I have for you the layout, the swatch card that we call them, and the picture of each of the colorways. Now, if you notice, the cape that I'm working on here has these big squares sort of toward the corner are actually printed. In the other ones, those big squares are background squares. And so you can see 5 background squares here. On the cape, you only see 1 because the others are printed. And here, just going forward with the gray, you see the 5 background squares, and with the blue, you see the 5 background squares. So we do have just a little cutting variation for the cape that you won't have in the other ones. So as always, you have the sheet that I've made for you, and then you have the directions that Michelle has provided for us. Remember, as you're cutting and as you're sewing, that she has called everything light, medium, dark, and background, which I have done here on our sheet as well, but that doesn't necessarily mean that what we're calling light is the lightest thing. So just follow. When it says light, you look here, this is my light. When it says dark, this is my dark, and so forth. Under each, I have the cutting as always, so follow this for the cutting, and then follow the Timeless with a Twist from Michelle for the construction. One other thing I want to point out about cutting is she did this once before, and that is there were places that she suggested adding 1/8 of an inch. And I did go ahead on each of those and add the 1/8 of an inch, so that instead of cutting the 2.5 she recommends, we've added the 1/8 of an inch to it. So let's look at what's in your packet. In the cape, you're actually going to have 5 fabrics. The others you have 4. And if you look at your sheet, this is the medium. I'm sorry, that's the light. This is the medium. So put yours out in order the way the sheet is. And this is called the dark. Now, on everything else, you go right to background. But on the cape, you have a separate thing that's those 4 squares I told you about, and then the background. So let's just follow along and get the cutting done. It says that I need 3 squares from the light, and you can follow the sheet that has all the measurements on it. That way I'm not saying them wrong out loud. Now, what I like to do is to trim my right-hand edge first, and I'm actually using the Tucker trimmer to cut with. Everything I need is right there, and it's the right size. It's not in my way. So I'm going to trim off just a little bit. Actually, I'm going to make sure I trim off just a little bit because in one direction of this, it's kind of close. So there's my little trim. And then my fabric is folded in half. I normally always cut with my fabric in half. And then the next thing I need, these need to be 4.5 inch squares. I'm actually using the line of my Tucker trimmer. I put the 4.5 right down there. I'm going to cut it off here. And while I'm there, I'm going to cut another one because I actually need 2 of them. So my 4.5 inch line is right on that edge, and then I just have some straight edge along the bottom. So now I've got 2 strips cut 4.5. So I need 3 4.5s. I'm going to cut the first one, first 2 together. Again, I'm going to trim this edge. It hasn't been trimmed yet. I like to make sure it's nice and straight and even. And then 4.5 here. So now what I should have a 4.5 line on the side, on the bottom, the 0 on the top, and then just cut off that piece right there. So there's my 1 4.5, and then I'm going to do the same thing just to cut more. That's 2, and I'm going to cut 1 more. This is my last 4.5 inch square. Okay, next on our list is the medium. That's the aboriginal dot here. And from here, I need to cut several things. I need to cut some 2 5/8. I need to cut 2 4.5s and then some 2s. I always like to start with the biggest piece. Let me see here if, yes, I'm just going to be able to get 2 4.5s across there. So I'm going to trim off my right hand edge. I'm going to turn my fabric, measure over 4.5 inches, just right there. If you're using the tucker trimmer to cut, you're always looking at the dotted side for the 1/2 inches. And then once again, trim here. And 4.5 here. 4.5. Close, but we can make it. That's why I always trim off pretty closely when I do that first trim. Now next I need 4 2 5/8. So I'm actually switching to this ruler because I don't have 5/8 on the tucker trimmer. Again, I like to use a rather small ruler when I'm cutting small things. It's just easier to handle. So 1 2 5/8. 5/8 is the little line right past a 1/2. I always think it's funny when, I'm going to need 2 of these, so I'm going to go ahead and cut another one. People cutting off the halves or off the quarters sometimes can make people a little nervous. But remember, it's only a line on the ruler. There's nothing magical about it. It's just the one little line past the 1/2 to do 5/8. I stacked those up. I'm going to trim here. So now I'm cutting all 4 that I need at the same time. 1 2, there's 2.5, and one more line is 2 5/8. There's all 4 of them. I still need 4 2s, so I might as well cut another strip. Two inches, strip, trim the right. I hope this helps maybe some of you who are still a little shaky about cutting, that it really is, it's not a hard thing to do. You have to be careful. I like, when I'm cutting small pieces like this, I like to use a small rotary cutter. And in fact, I go to this 28mm for almost everything. And this is a cutter, this particular one is one we've gotten in rather recently. It has a nice shape to it. They've replaced the old 28 with this one. It has a nice shape to it, and it's a quick release blade changer. So when you need to change the blade, you just need to push this red in the back. Here's the old one. You can see it's the same size. This one has a little more curvature to it. This was always my go-to one. Now this is my go-to one. Okay, so we cut the first 2 things. The next thing we have to cut is the dark. And from here, I just need 2 4.5s. Again, I keep it folded. I can go back to my tucker trimmer where it's got my nice 4.5s on it. Let me cut the first side. Put your blade out, it works much better. I really do try when I'm not cutting to put the blade in. I'm going to do 4.5 here. I've got the 4.5 inch mark on the edge of my left hand edge. Zip that off. That's not needed. I'm going to trim one edge. Always trim that first edge. It might look really straight to you, but you want it to be totally perpendicular to everything else you have. Then I'm going to cut the squares. This is the piece that on 3 of them is actually from background. On this one, it is from a print. We just felt with the cafe, putting all that background in there did not do him justice. We just needed more going on. So from this one, I need the 4 squares. These are smaller ones. So I need 4 of them, so I'm going to cut 2 strips. Again, I just stack them up. And lastly is the background. And here I need 1 3.5 inch squares and a whole bunch of 2 5/8. So I'm just going to cut the single this time because I just need that one square. Now, one of the things you can do with a tucker is I need to cut the 3.5. So what I do is I put the 3.5 close to the edge, 3.5, 3.5. And then I'm going to just do the right and the top. Then take this corner all the way 180. It needs to be up higher. There we go. So I've turned this now so that I can now put the 3.5 right on the bottom and the left, and then cut here. Now, from this, I need to cut a whole bunch of 2 5/8, I think. So fold it, trim it. I think I'm going to go back, because I'm just doing strips to start with. I'm going to go back to this ruler. 2.5 inches. Is that? No, 2 5/8. Remember, we made it bigger. So I'm going to go twice, 2 5/8. Stack those up. Two 5/8. So what would you do if you didn't cut it big enough? You could use something else. You could stitch some things back together. You could call us and ask us for another piece. So there's always lots of options. Okay, there we are, all cut. I'm going to set this up to show you how to pair things up then. So what I want to do next is to show you how I get organized to do the next part. There are a lot of pieces here, and there's no need to really do things one by one. We can do things in batches. The very first thing I did that I got ready here was I took all of the 2 5/8 inch squares, which are 8 of the background and 4 of the medium, and drew diagonal lines on each of them. They are going to be used to make flying geese. I'm also going to use these pairs to make half square triangles, which become quarter square triangles. So on the 2 goldy ones here, it doesn't matter which set you use, but I'm going to use these gold ones. I'm also going to do a little diagonal line. This ruler's a little short. I like this little ruler. It's a 1x6, and that's good for the smaller ones. But for these, I needed it a little bit longer. So these are my two medium, the larger squares. And I'm going to draw a diagonal line there. I just use pencil. You can if you have colored pencils, or if you have something that's really dark, you might want to use a white pencil on it. Just corner to corner. Okay. And then I'm going to set these up to get started sewing. These are going to be half square triangles. So to start, and then they're quarter square. So I'm going to match all those. This one, in my case, it's a piece of the gold and a piece of the polka dot. Okay, I'm going to put those there. And then all of this is used to make flying geese. We're making the fast flying geese like we've done before. There's going to be one difference in that. Let me pull this back over here. These flying geese right here, these little flying geese, notice that it's got, this one has the green big triangle, and then it has a yellow on one side and a background on the other side. So on this case, the yellow is on the left and the gray is on the right, but the one adjacent to it is the opposite, gray on the left, yellow on the right. But it's very easy to do when you make fast flying geese, to get them to come out in opposite pairs like that. So what we're going to do is use these beautiful green as the background, and I'm going to start by setting these up with background fabrics. And remember how to do this, that you put them in opposite corners with the line becoming continuous. They're right sides together. And the same with this one. This one does not become opposite pairs. It's all background, but that's okay. We're going to start all in the same way. Now, what I'm going to show you is I do all of the first steps of my stitching all together. So I'm going to stitch on one side of each of the larger pieces, then one side of each of the the flying geese pieces. I'm going to turn it around and go in the opposite direction. I've done one side. I realized I didn't have my needle in the down position, so I've touched the screen. It will now always stop in the down position. When I get to the end, I can actually sew off just one stitch, pick up my next piece. Now, I like to lift the foot a little bit and get it under there. If you have your knee lift set up, that's a good place to use your knee lift too. So as I come to the end here, I'm going to sew to the end. I'm going to pull the whole thing out and turn and go back the other way. So I'm going to come right off the end, leave the needle down, lift up the foot, cut, and now I just have everything still attached, and I'm going to go back the other way. One of the advantages, of course, of chain piecing like that is that there's not a whole lot of stopping and starting. And because you don't have a whole lot of stopping and starting, there's not a whole bunch of threads. So all we're going to do is cut these apart at the little chains that hold them together. I don't have a whole lot of ends. finishes my first round of sewing. I've got the first step of everything done. So I've come back to my cutting board here, and everything needs to be cut apart on the drawn line that I had. So I'm just going to take a few seconds to do that. It's easier, I think, if you use a ruler. Just put it right on the line and take your trusty little cutter. So just right down that center line. After this comes pressing. So again, I've done that step with everything. So I'm going to pull over this wool mat. And did this. All right, that iron is serious. So I'm going to press these so that on the half square triangles, everything goes to the yellow side. It doesn't really matter, but now I like to press everything just as it was sewn. So you're just leaving them closed for the first round. This is some little iron I got going on here. Look at the steam. They're very hot. Next, I'm going to open them. Now, because I want the seams to go toward the yellow, that's the one I put on the top. And I always do the actual opening cutting, pressing from the right side. So as you press, just make sure that that is opened all the way. I'm not going to press these again. They got hot when I did that the first pressing on them. I'm taking the steam back off of this because my hand is close to it. This is nice. I had never used this iron before. We were looking for something just to have in the shot here. Am I too low in the shot? Do I need to be up here?
You're good.
Okay, so now I'm back. These are the flying geese where I have the two, what are now triangles. And again, I'm going to press it just as they're sewn and then flip up the triangles and press from the right side. Pressing is so important to your sewing. Even that first step of pressing it as it was stitched before you even open it up, it just flattens out all of those little tucks that you might have in there. See how it's just not quite flat. But if you give it a little shot first, when you do open it up, it becomes a straighter seam. So these are the ones that are going to have the other square. When I add it's going to be a different color. This one with the polka dots has a matching on the other side. These have matching squares. So that square is going to go on there. And then these have the opposite color, the 4 of them. So these will each have the yellow added to it. Remember, the line that you have drawn on the yellow one goes from corner to center. That's the way we're going to stitch it. So those are ready to go. And at the same time, I'm going to put these together into my quarter squares. So the way this is going to work is you put them right sides together, the seams line up, but the colors are on the opposite side. So I like to squeeze that together. I like to put a pin right in the center here. Oops, I have to do one thing yet. I do have to draw another line on two of these. Because I'm going to stitch in the opposite direction now, and I need the line. It's easiest to, when you draw a line, it's easiest to do it on your mat. It gives it a little grip instead of doing it on your hard table. Really, if you were really going to do a lot of drawing, the best thing to have is a sandpaper board. So again, I'm putting these together. The seams are matching up. All the edges should match up. It doesn't always come out perfectly, but, and then I want to pin it right in the center, because that's where I need to make sure that it matches. So I'm putting this pin this way so it's perpendicular to what I'm going to sew. And then just so long as everything else is in line, you're good to go. And the same with this one. The first time I did this at home, I matched the two that had the line on it, and then I had to go back and draw another one. So you want to match a line with a not line and a line with a not line. And you can feel right in there that the seams are nesting together, so you get a nice crisp corner in the center of it. Okay, now we're going to go back to the sewing machine again, and this time we are once again going to sew all the way down one side to everything, back up the other side. And what we will have accomplished when we do that is we will have made all the component pieces that we need in just two times at the sewing machine. Okay, so here I am back at the machine. I'm really doing the same thing I did previously. I've got my 1/4 inch foot. I've got the needle set so it's going to stay down. And I'm just going to run that line that I've drawn on all of them, just right under the right hand edge of the foot. So here we go. Now moving on, they were the 1/4 square triangles, I'm moving on to completing the flying geese. Now these are the geese that have the opposite color on them. There, I'm going to turn everything around and go back the other way. And done. I've now done all the stitching that I need to do to make the initial components. So I'm back here at the cutting mat again, and now we're going to do our final cutting on the lines that we've drawn. Notice there's only a couple places that I have any threads, and that's because it's where I started and stopped. They're just, because of the way I chain stitched, there are no extra threads, mostly. I mean, there's the frayed parts, but. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut all of these on the line. And you see, this is the two-tone kind of flying goose that we're making. So I'm going to cut all these and then press them, and I'll show you what to do next. All of these will be getting trimmed down. So although I like to sew pretty accurately, it's kind of nice to know that those edges, if they are not exactly lined up, they are going to get trimmed. Okay, all cut. Next comes pressing again. All right, so once again, I'm going to press everything as it was sewn.
Move it a little higher.
And then open it up with my new little friendly iron here. Actually, on these quarter squares, we can do the little swirl on the inside. Let me come back to those and I'll show you that again. So I'll continue with the flying geese. Of course, when you're doing just pressing squares, pressing units, you can let the iron do the work. With just a little bit of pressure and the good heat, if you keep it there for a second, it'll do its job. This iron's perfect for this size, where you're just using the small mat and small pieces. On the half square triangles that have become quarter square triangles, we can swirl this center. And so what we do is we pick a few of the stitches out right in the center. Pin works just fine, or seam ripper. I didn't come over here with a seam ripper. There is a seam ripper. You just have like 2 stitches to take out in the seam allowance. And then you can open up the center into this square. So there's my square in the center. And the seam allowances then kind of swirl around. They're all going, in this case, they're all going clockwise. You'll find that you'll have 2 that end up clockwise and 2 that end up counterclockwise, just because of the way they started out their lives. So I usually like to get a nice, so on the back, get it going in the right way, but then give it its final pressing from the top, because then you can pull out any of those little pleats that might end up at the seam allowance. I keep pulling this towards myself, and that's not really good. Okay, so then take out a couple of stitches. This is my brass seam ripper, which I don't think they make anymore. And I love that seam ripper. Again, I just coax it kind of into the right direction from the back, but then turn it over and do a final press from the front. Okay, So open up the center, press the seams. Okay, all of them are now pressed. What comes next? Next is trimming. So now we're down to the trimming part. This is a little bit tedious to do, but very important. We're not going to make you sit through me doing it 20 times at regular speed. But the first thing we're going to trim are the quarter square triangles. And we're going to use the Tucker trimmer for this. It is the perfect job for this ruler. We've used this many times. We will be using the dotted line section of it because we're trimming this to 3.5. So I'm going to put the dark line that has the dot, I'm going to put that right on one of my seams, and then the dashed line that says 3.5 on the other seam. Now these are very close. There's not a whole lot of trimming to do here, but there's a little bit, and that's great. So I'm going to trim the right and the top. I'm doing this a little further away from myself than I normally would. And then this is a nice square corner. I turn that in the opposite direction. And now I can put my 3.5-inch line right at the bottom, right at the side. Again, the dark line on my seam, the dotted line on my seam, and I have just this little bit to trim off. Whoops. Again, the dark line on one of the seams, the 3.5 on the other seam. Over here, my 3.5-inch line is there's just a little bit of raw edge hanging out, and then I'm going to trim this side and this side. This is why you have to be sure that you are not making too generous of your 1/4 inches when you make these, because you'll have nothing to trim, and you want something to trim. And by using the Tucker trimmer, you are ensuring that you're trimming off the right amount from each edge and that the intersection comes out right at the center. When you're holding the ruler, if you put some of your fingers off of the ruler, it's a little easier to keep it steady. Okay, so those are the half squares that became 1/4 squares. And now we have the flying geese. So we have a lot of them, and they all have to be trimmed down to 2 by 3.5. And for that, of course, we're going to use the wing clipper. So the very first secret to trimming these is to put your piece down so that the point is down, it's facing toward you. And I'm going to put my ruler on top. I've got some cross lines right on my seam lines. I have my raw edges on the left and the bottom hanging past the 3.5 and the 2, and then move this down just a little bit. And then I'm going to trim the right and the top and turn it. And now the 3.5 and the 2 will be right on the edge, and the X up here. So here's my 2, here's my 3.5, and this X is right at the point. And that makes certain that your seam line is a 1/4 inch from your point. Your seam line, your edge is a 1/4 inch from the point. I'm trimming these farther away from myself than I usually do. Okay, one more. Point down. Lines on top of the seam, hanging off at the 3.5 and the 2, and then the right, and there. Okay, so the next thing we have to do is to get all of these myriad of pieces into the right location so we can sew them together. I like to set up my block right next to my sewing machine so it's all in order for me to sew. I make the mistake at home all the time of actually setting the block up on my cutting table, and then I have to move all the little pieces over to my sewing table. So just do it right the first time, right next to your sewing machine. I start my block from the center out. So my center is this gray, and then the quarter square triangles are all around. So next I put those in. I am looking at the picture of the sheet that I handed out to you, and you should do the same thing. And then next come these pretty squares in the corners. If you are doing a color other than the cave color, these will be more backgrounds. But in the cave, we really needed to have, we liked having the more going on. The next thing I did was I put these little guys that go into the corner, get those set. And then I'm going to put in these that match the quarter squares. They go matchy-matchy, so you can tell where those go. Okay, and I'm down to the last thing. I have these flying geese that have the two different colors on them. And there are two sets. There's 4 that go in this direction and 4 that go in this direction. Every corner needs one of each. So I'm going to pick up one of each, and then put them like that. In this case, the green match, it's a different green, but it matches. And then the yellows, but right up against that little square. So that's one of my touch points of how whether I'm getting them in the right spot. So this one would go here and this one here. If I tried putting them in the wrong place, then to get these to match, they're going in the wrong direction. So you have to get them all in the right direction. It's a good idea not to wear floppy sleeves when you do this. I've learned that lesson often. So then this goes here. This is where I always say, take a moment, step back and look at it. Make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Some of the things you want to check. These corners have the yellow square and then the 2 triangles touching it. You have all of these flying geese are pointed outward, and as are these. They're all pointed outward. Okay, now this is kind of a heavy lift here, but it's the best way to get the whole thing together easily with the least starting and stopping that you would need to do, and to keep everything in the correct order. So what I do is I want to sew these together. Everything in these rows are going to be sewn together. I'm going to flip the second row on top of the first row, because then when I bring it over to my sewing machine, it's in the same orientation. And just like I did before, I'm going to chain stitch. And then I'm going to take the next thing, second row on top of the first row. Bring it right over to the machine. Don't turn it, don't flip it. Just keep it in the same orientation. Oh, I do have the knee lift in now, so I could just lift with my knee when I want to put the next one in. Second row on top of the first row. Now, you'll have some places where the seams don't nest. They both go in the same direction. It's sort of unavoidable. They match up nicely in some places and not in others. I apologize for my squeaky chair. You don't notice things like that until you know someone's listening to you. Again, I'm using my knee lift, and I can just lift up the foot a little bit to get that under there. So as I chain stitch, they're almost butted up against each other. And one last for this row. Okay. Now I could go on and sew the next 2 rows together, but then I find I get a little more confused as I go. So what I like to do, I'm going to cut and then take this out, pull it all the way in the same way that I just sewed it. I'm going to get rid of those. I don't like the threads. I'm going to open this one up and then take the next row and sew it on top. You know, the secret to using a knee lift is not to be touching the knee lift while you're sewing. And I'm pretty good at that. Some people like to sew with their left foot and use the knee lift with their right knee, and that way they don't get them both going at the same time, because then you have a mess. If you lift up the foot and try to sew at the same time, it doesn't like it. Okay, so again, cut. I'm going to pull this all the way towards me. Open up and add the next one. Okay, the last one in this row, and these 2 seams are not opposing, so I'm going to just kind of hold them in place there. One last time, cut. Now, as I build from here, you should be able to see that it's symmetrical from the center in both ways. So that's what you should be observing when you put this together. Hopefully all is well, and that's how it's coming out. And you see by chain stitching, everything does stay in the same order. And as I put that on there, I can see that it's making a mirror image of what's on the other end. So this is the interesting thing that you're going to have when you get done that. So everything is in order. Here I am back at my cutting mat. This is the block that I've gotten, that I've made into rows. And next I'm going to cut them all apart and then move them to my cutting mat. So I can just take my rotary cutter actually and just knit those little threads. And see, by doing this, one of the ways to work efficiently is to be doing the same operation over and over again. So I'm just cutting everything all at the same time. Okay, I'm going to stack up my rows so they're in order. I'm going to reassemble this upside down. I'm just turning everything over. And now if you look at this, the first, third, and fifth row are all going to be pressed the same. And that will be that these seams are going to be pressed outward and these seams are going to be pressed inward. So it's mostly that you're always pressing to the square. So here's the square here, and then the other is the opposite. This one, the square, so the center part of it goes outward, and these go inward. And then these go inward and these go outward. So all the way down. And I'm going to take and do one row at a time now. And from the wrong side, I'm just going to do what I call a little coaxing to get these to go in the direction that I want. So on this fifth row, the outer ones go out and the inner ones go in. And I just do a little coaxing like that, and then do my final coaxing from the front. Do my final pressing. And then on this one, everything goes toward the square. And just get them kind of wanting to go in the right direction. And then finally from the front. Make sure that you're keeping them in that direction as you go across. And really, to follow my rule totally, what I should be doing is pressing them first the way that they were stitched to get any of those little puckers out of there. Okay. So these are going to go in because they go toward the square, which means they have to go out. And again, I'll do them just as they were sewn, a real quick press. Toward the square. And the last one. So I only have squares on the outer edges here, so the outer ones are going to go out to the square, which means the inner ones go in. And these, in Michelle's directions, she has which way they go here. Okay, we're all ready to do our last bit of stitching, which means we have to go back to the sewing machine. So I've picked my rows up in order with the top one on the top. I've come back to my sewing machine and I'm going to lay them back out the way they go again. And we're going to do the horizontal rows. So I'm going to start at the top. I'm just going to flip this one on top of this one. Now here is the spot where we have to do some pinning because we have all of these intersections. We've purposely pressed them so they go in the opposite directions. And I'm going to pin in every place that the intersections cross. Oops, and they should be opposing seams all the way down the row. If you can't tell if the seams are butting up against each other well, you can kind of peek inside, open up the seam allowance a little bit and see that they are coming together. Here's a better one to look at. So I can kind of peek in and make sure those are right up against each other. I'm going to sew that. You know, the one thing you don't want to do is just start at one edge and start sewing because without pinning, because there's no way that is going to come out with everything matching and the same size. You do have to, you know, one of the finesses of stitching is that when you have something bulky like this, you do have to maybe slow down a little bit. And you didn't just see me run over a pin there, I know it. You know, make sure that your foot is running smoothly over it. Realign things as you go if you need to. Now, once again, I can just continue right on here. So you've noticed that I don't like to stop and start a lot. I do everything I can do without stopping. Okay, when I come to this point, I'm going to go back here and cut off the, my original one. I just got it on the, I got it. So this is the top piece, and that is going to go on there, right? Yep. So again, I didn't have to pull what I was working on out of the machine. I just keep doing the next part. After this seam, then I have to take everything out. One last time I have to cut. And that's right, and then I'm just going to sew these together. And that's it. So there it is, all together. The very last thing that we have to do is to press these final seams. And Michelle has you press them open. You can go ahead and do that. It's a little laborious. I did that on my first block and I was very happy with it. But we don't have to really do that here. So that is the end of this block. I hope that you picked up some pointers along the way, and that because we don't usually really get to sew together, hopefully you were able to stop and start and sew along with me. And thank you for coming. I hope that the next time we get to do it in person.